What's understood doesn't have to be explained. The presumptive top overall pick in the 2025 draft minted as such shortly after 8 Eastern. Cam Ward tabbed as the franchise guy in Tennessee. CBS Sports' Aditi Kinkhabwala caught up with QB1 shortly after.
Cam, we've presumed this for quite some time, but now that it's official, what feels different?
That I finally can find somewhere to live now. I can start looking at houses, and I'm ready. I've been dreaming of this, and I'm glad I get to do it in Nashville.
Head coach Brian Callahan told us that from the very first meeting, he thought this might be a fit. When did it start feeling right for you?
Really after the season in Miami, when I found out when they had lost that game to Houston, they got the first pick, I knew it was destiny. Just seeing that team and what they went through just a year ago, I plan on, getting there and trying to change things around. I want to win a lot of games with those guys, and, I just want to be a good teammate at the end of the day.
In your conversations with Coach Callahan and knowing the quarterbacks that he's worked with, what are you most looking forward to?
Just learning more from him every day. I still got a lot to learn in the NFL and in my football career, but I'm doing it behind one of the best, offensive minds out there and one of the best head coaches out there. So I'm ready to get to work. I'm ready to sit with him, the OC, the quarterback coach, and, the defensive staff and learn what they do too.
Who's the first new teammate you've heard from?
The first new teammate, I would say C. Rid. I heard from him, Tony Pollard as well, and Lockett.
Is Ridley asking for the ball?
You already know he's going to ask for the ball, but I'm going to make sure I give it to him, though.
All right, perfect. Thank you, and congratulations.
Congratulations there in order for a dream realized by Cam Ward and 31 others. Round one of the NFL draft. A look at your top 10, where the Jags trade up from 5 to 2 for the two-way star in Travis Hunter. Cleveland now owning the Jags 2026 first and more. Ashton Genty becomes the highest drafted running back since Saquon some 7 years ago. Ted McMillan, your first true wideout, selected at 8 to Carolina. The goal always being, get out of the top 10 next season. Post-draft is presented by Geico. Switch and save, get more with Geico. Joe Musso, pleased to be alongside our draft experts in Ryan Wilson and Rand Carthon. Fellas, long night, lot to sink our teeth into. And Rand, I want to go to you first here because you have an intimate understanding of that player and that place, the marriage in Tennessee. How do you like that fit? And how does Cam Ward start the process of going about fulfilling that promise of being the first overall?
I think it's a great fit, and you lean on Brian Callahan's experience in working with quarterbacks from young guys to the older guys, and he understands how to meet every quarterback at every point of their career in which they are. And so in the next step for Cam is to get in the building, get situated, and then just put his head down and just go to work and spend as much time as he can with offensive coordinator Nick Holtz and quarterback coach Bo Hardegree and just learn this offense, get into it, and just also build a relationship and a rapport with his new receiving corps. He hasn't worked with these guys, but you have a Calvin Ridley, you just signed a Tyler Lockett, and you're getting a Traylon Burks coming off of injury. And so you got those guys now, and now you know where you're going to be, and now you can start building a rapport with them.
Hey, Ray, let me ask you this. What's the biggest pitfall you want to avoid for a young quarterback? Because Cam has had success everywhere he's gone, like many young quarterbacks coming into the league, and it's going to be a different animal like it is for every quarterback coming into the league. And what do you need to guard against, not so much in OTAs or maybe even training camp, but once the preseason and the regular season starts?
Just overload with information. You don't want to overload them with information because there's going to be a lot to process anyway. And then the other trick to it is teaching him how to take the verbiage from his previous system and how to marry it with the current system so there's a language there that you can help speak with him, and then also sprinkle in some things that are comfortable for him. And that's how Brian Callahan minds work. So I think it'll be a good marriage for those guys.
Information and expectations certainly at 1. Ryan Wilson, we had him at 1 for a while now, but as it is cemented there and you take a look at Ward in that offense, the development, where does he need to grow fastest, soonest?
That was going to be my follow-up, and we talked about this last year. And again, Joe, we all know that you're a Bears fan, but one of the things that Caleb had to work on early was not playing so much hero ball, which is what he had to do at USC because in part of the offensive line struggled. Same thing with Jaden Daniels, but it felt like the marriage in Washington was better for him with Cliff Kingsbury in terms of helping him have success early on. And I think that's the thing with Cam. He plays a lot of hero ball, and I would imagine he had these conversations throughout the process with teams asking him, why would you not take the check down here, and how are we going to get you to be able to take the check down at the next level? Because as you know, sacks are going to come fast and furious if you try to do too much every single play.
It became immediately apparent after that first overall pick that we were in store for some wheeling and dealing here in this first round as well, where The Jags trade up to 2 and land one man that plays as 2. How do we like this deal for both parties involved? Because, yes, you get the two-way star in Jacksonville. You pay a pretty penny. The Browns now positioned nicely with an extra first next year as well, Ryan. When you saw this trade on the surface, one that we heard mumblings of leading up to the draft, does it feel like there's a winner one way or the other, or both teams walk out feeling good about their side?
I think both teams win, but they win at different times, if that makes sense. And by that, I mean that I give Andrew Berry a ton of credit because there was certainly probably a lot of pressure on him because Travis Hunter is the #1 player on my big board, and I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. But the other thing, Rand, is that James Gladstone, the new GM in Jacksonville, gave up a first-round pick in addition to the second and a fourth this year to go 4 spots, and that feels rich unless you hit on Travis Hunter and you think he's going to be who you expect him to be.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think both teams walk away feeling great about what they've done tonight. James Gladstone steps in and you shoot your shot.
Yeah.
You go and get a guy that you truly coveted. And in a market like Jacksonville, which is seen as a lower market team, you get one of the most exciting players that have come into this draft in recent time. And now you have that to promote there. And then if you're Cleveland, you still sit at 5 and get a premium player for you and your defense to move forward, and you get the picks not only this year, but you get the picks next year as well.
Right.
How do you put a price on something that we haven't seen in a very long time? And we saw the price of it there as Jacksonville moves up to 2, Cleveland moves back, maximizes some of that future compensation. But the Jags got a nice piece there, whether they want to help out that defense, that pass defense that ranked near the bottom of the league last season, or roll them out there next to BTJ and get things going offensively. It's going to be exciting in Duval. The Giants, meantime, had the night they wanted to, kind of drew it up this way. You get best available there at 3, you get back into the first and draft what could be the quarterback of the future. How do you don't have to put a grade on it, but how do they grade out in your eyes tonight? This has to be a glowing success.
It's like we talked about this. We talked about this off camera, and if you were the New York Giants, you walk out of here with the pass rusher that you covered it, and that may have been the #1 player on their board. And then you move back into 2, you quiet the questions about the quarterback of the future, and you're able to get that. We've talked about it forever, it feels like, knowing that they were there at 34 and the possibilities of them moving back into the bottom of 1 to get a quarterback, and that's what they did.
All right, we don't want to get too far out in front of the story here, but they now have an interesting quarterback rooms on their hands, certainly with a couple of veterans there, Tommy DeVito as well. You have a head coach and a general manager, Ryan, that don't necessarily have time on their side. What does the management of this quarterback room look like moving forward?
That's the big question, right? And as you reminded me, ownership is running out of patience with the direction of the organization, and you brought in Brian Dable to get the quarterback situation fixed. First year with Daniel Jones worked out, and then things went sideways, and now Daniel Jones is no longer there. And here's the other thing to keep in mind, and not to throw a wet blanket on the first day of the draft if you're a Giants fan, but historically when 2 quarterbacks or fewer go in round 1, the second quarterback taken almost never works out. The only exception is 2008 with Matt Ryan going first and then Joe Flacco. The other quarterbacks that have been drafted since then in a 2-quarterback only first round have been, I don't want to call it cringeworthy, but it's tough to look at in retrospect. So hopefully the Giants can buck the trend with Jackson Dart, but history is not on their side.
It's going to be interesting how they figure that out and develop a young quarterback in Jackson Dart at the same time playing with that urgency that they need to maintain those jobs. But you see there from Kayvon Thibodeau some excitement coming in from his teammates already there in New York. The biggest story perhaps, and there were quite a few of them, is the story that was not made, that being Shedeur Sanders sliding to day 2 of the NFL draft. Ryan, as recent as 2 months ago, we were talking about this kid as a potential 1-1. Now we're talking about day 2. How do you process it?
It's hard to process. Like I'm trying to find the words here, in part because, okay, Shedeur Sanders wasn't for everyone, and we knew that coming through this process. Some teams weren't crazy about the way he interviewed, and that's okay. But there seemed to be, and I think Rand would agree, that if Kenneth Grant were gone for the Steelers, they might give serious consideration to Shedeur there. They have a huge need at quarterback. It didn't happen. They took Derek Harmon, and that's the direction they chose to go. But I now don't know where Shedeur comes off the board because we've talked about the Giants trading back into the first round to get a quarterback. We knew that the New Orleans Saints like Jackson Dart. They now pick at 40. Do they like Shedeur enough to take him there? And if he gets past there and you get back to the Pittsburgh Steelers, well, they don't have a second-round pick this year. So it may take future draft considerations if that's something they're considering.
I mean, for me, I don't get it. And I know the game in the NFL has changed in terms of the quarterback position. There was a time where the dual threat quarterback, if you will, was not. And they were said that you have to be able to stand in the pocket, process, and play quarterback. But this is what Shedeur does.
The cyclical nature of the sport has turned us to the flip side of that coin now.
Correct. And we're talking about the all-time leader in college football history in terms of completion percentage. And that's one of the things that matters in playing the quarterback position. So, again, I really feel like at the end, he will go into a really good situation. And as if he was not already motivated enough to prove himself, he's going to be even more motivated now.
Yeah, you talk about a chip on the shoulder, and Pittsburgh perhaps reworking some things to get back into that second round, like you mentioned, but they were staring at him there at 21, and they instead go interior. We saw a number of defensive tackles, I believe 4 or 5. Three technique types drafted here in the first round.
And one thing to add, and you have to take this into consideration when taking this quarterback, let's just say it is Pittsburgh. They figure out a way to get back in. Okay. Now you have a young quarterback who's going to be your future as a second-round pick, who after 3 years, if he plays well, you're going to have to go back and renegotiate and get that done versus taking him in one where you can kind of string it along with the fifth-year option and possibly even a franchise tag.
You also have to look him in the eye and say, we didn't love you at 21, but man, we moved back to 45 and we love you at 45.
I want to ask quickly, Rand, this. Do you think maybe there was any concern or trepidation or hesitation because the Kenny Pickett thing didn't work out in 2022 as a first-round pick? It felt like at the time that was a reach, and maybe they're wanting to be careful of crossing that bridge again?
I don't think, and this is no disrespect, I don't think you can put Shedeur's tape and Kenny Pickett's tape next to each other and say, oh, we don't want to repeat that mistake again, because it's not the same. It doesn't look the same.
Maybe you put Shedeur's tape and Aaron Rodgers' tape side by side, and you're looking at the immediate future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Neither of those are currently Pittsburgh Steelers. We will make that here, just strike that into the record. We also have a running back come off the board as early as we've seen in the last 7 years, and Ashton Jeanty making his way to Las Vegas. Rand, my eyes immediately go to who's going to be the guy scheming things up here. We're not on the Smurf turf anymore. We're in Vegas, and we got to get things turned around quickly, and you have to do it for us. Chip Kelly is going to be the mind that moves this man. How do you like that marriage?
I love it, because if you look at a Chip Kelly's offense, it's always been about spreading the defense apart horizontally, and it's going to create those natural run creases in there when they get in those shotgun run formations. And so this is what Ashton Jeanty does. He gets the ball downhill, he hits it and he gets it, and then he's a tough tackle. So I like the fit, because there is a chance for him to, I mean, let's go back. He had 1,900 yards rushing after contact. And so now we got a player and a scheme that he may not get touched until he gets to the second level. So can you imagine, even if he got half those yards in the NFL, we're looking at a top 10 leading rusher.
Is this best case scenario for Ashton Jeanty's future to find his way to Las Vegas?
They desperately need help there, and you might say, well, they have needs on defense. Maybe the offensive line could have used some help here. I would just point to last year and the way Brock Bowers played as the 13th overall pick with a suspect quarterback situation, and he was literally one of the best players in the NFL, and that became clear a few months into his rookie campaign. So I think with the addition of Geno Smith, you talked about Chip Kelly, good luck finding someone to motivate players, as well as Pete Carroll has done over the entirety of his career. And then Ashton Jeanty, who is a great young man, could not have been more excited about landing in Las Vegas, landing in that program. And it feels like they're not going to win the division, but it feels like they're going to be competitive for the first time in a while.
Not long ago, we saw Josh Jacobs put the silver and black on his back and run with that thing. Ashton Jeanty going to be asked to do a lot of the same here, with other needs still existing for Vegas. Gentlemen, great work as always. We got plenty more coming here on CBS Sports HQ after night 1 of the NFL Draft. Taking a look at your running backs selected in the top 10. Bijan was 8th overall, Saquon 2nd back in 2018. Ashton Jeanty heading to the Strip. Back on post-draft presented by Geico. What a luxury when one pick nets 2 talents. The Jacksonville Jaguars now tasked with striking the right balance for the two-way star in Travis Hunter. The Wonderkin GM, James Gladstone, taken to the phones on his first draft day in their big chair and swapping spots with Cleveland at a steep price, but ultimately landing Hunter in Duval. Back in studio with the guys to split this thing down the middle. We're going to go AFC first, get into the NFC, talking some winners and losers here. And hear me out. I love a playmaker. I know game starts inside out, but we're going to start outside in and talk playmakers here in the AFC. Your biggest AFC winner playmaker is who?
Ashton Jeanty. He's incredible. We've talked about him just the last segment in terms of what he's capable of doing. And you might say, and I heard someone on this set say it, named Joe Musso, well, he didn't play in a Power 4 program. He ran all over Oregon like he owned Oregon.
I believe I said he broke tackles in the Mountain West. I just want to be quoted properly.
Fair enough. I've been known to embellish. This case was no different.
He's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. We're looking to pull at the small strings that all of these prospects offer, and that was the one to pull.
And exactly. And as our buddy Rick Spillman used to say, you hate the kids until you draft them, and then you love them.
Then you love them.
So there's every reason to love Ashton Genty. Special at Boise State. He's going to be special at the next level with Brock Bowers and, of course, Geno Smith, the new quarterback.
Rand, give me a playmaker here on the AFC side.
For me, I'll go with the late pick in pick 22 and go with Marion Hampton, running back out of North Carolina. And you just see that fit. That feels like a Jim Harbaugh fit. A guy that's going to get downhill. He's going to attack those creases. And can we talk about how big and massive and strong that new Chargers offensive line is going to be? Ooh. And you have the threat of Justin Herbert pulling the ball away on RPOs. And think about it, he's going to step into a J.K. Dobbins role, as J.K. Dobbins ran for 905 yards last year in 13 games. So you're going to get that same similar style runner, and I think he'll be just as productive.
It was Alt, the premium pick last year. This year it's Hampton, thinking about the big hog mollies up front, the running game. It's so in the image of Coach Harbaugh and what he's trying to do. Year one, he takes them back to the playoffs. Year two, we'll see what sort of step forward they can take with those guys leading the way. Let's talk about offensive line here on the AFC side, because this was an offensive line class that, presented opportunity early, mid-round, late. We turn our attention to you, your biggest winner.
Armand Membu Wilson.
Yes.
As Rand likes to call him my son, because I've been on the Armand Membu bandwagon for quite a while and been fighting off all the haters. And look, he goes to the Jets, and not necessarily a surprising pick. I was leaning maybe towards Tyler Warner at this point, but I think he makes a ton of sense because you get your right tackle. He's 6'3" at the combine. He grew to 6'4" at his pro day, so that's great news. He has 34-inch arms, so if you care about arm length, that's perfect. And he is only 20 years old. He is only going to get better. So I love the idea of him at right tackle, next to Elijah Vera-Tucker, their former first-round pick. Yeah. Next to Ola Pashinu at the left tackle position, last year's first-round pick. Joe Tippmann, their second-round pick at center. They are building an offensive line. They are helping out Justin Fields for now. We'll see what that looks like. He's on a 2-year deal, and we'll go from there.
You just send him Rand and I's best at Thanksgiving. That's all that we're asking, is that when the family gets back together, that you say hello for us.
Keep the receipts.
Your favorite offensive line selection, AFC side.
Before we go there, we thought Ryan was in the picture when they showed him in the draft. We were waiting for Ryan to pop out.
He was waiting for the hug in the background.
Left me hanging.
But for me, I went Will Campbell.
Okay.
Tackle out of LSU to New England. It's just the right fit. We're talking about a solid, consistent player, and everyone wants to talk about the arm length or lack thereof, however you want to scale it. This young man is going to step in. He'll be a day one starter, and he'll be New England starter at left tackle for the next 10 years, hopefully.
Yeah.
But he has to, in my mind, having Mike Vrabel there, remind Vrabel of his former teammate in Matt Light. Similar build, similar arm length, has to remind him of that, and that's what probably made him comfortable with the pick.
Man, to put somebody in that sort of echelon, or to ask that of him, that's exactly what they need out of this pick. You're hoping that you're getting Drake Mays, the godfather to his future children. That's the type of thing you're trying to do here. Is, like you said, a decade worth of production, and it could start here on this day for Campbell. Getting to the defensive side of the ball, I'm still taken aback a bit by the fact that we got so many interior defensive linemen selected. We saw a couple edges, yes, a couple off-ball linebackers as well, but your favorite defensive line selection going to an AFC team, Rand?
Got to go with my guy Malachi Starks, and I'm riding this train. Malachi Starks to me is what Membu is to Ryan. I love this guy, and I think he is an absolute perfect fit into the Baltimore defense. This just screams a Baltimore defense, a defensive pick and style of player. And you put him in a secondary with Kyle Hamilton. And now you can do some creative things. You can play a rock and roll safety, and what I mean by that is now you just have two safeties. And wherever the strength of the offense is, you just roll one down versus the other, and you don't have to make one just the strong, one is the free. And both of these guys have the ability to play nickel. Right, so Kyle Hamilton can be your big nickel in run situations, and then Malachi can be your nickel in some of your other sub versus 11 personnel teams. So I love the fit here, and I think he's going to step in another guy to be a day one starter.
So much of Baltimore's success defensively last year came when Hamilton found that niche once again, found that that way to play the game like he only does. Now you have two willing tacklers back there in your final level of defense. I know that I presented it as up front defensive line, but any defensive player, AFC, as we had here, that you're in love with the pick.
I'm going to say in the secondary as well. I'm going to go with Shedeur Sanders out of Texas. Plays in the slot, can play outside, can play free safety, can play closer to the line of scrimmage. Ran the 4.39 in the combine, and he played that fast. He reminded me a lot of Brian Branch, excuse me, coming out of Detroit a few years ago, but Brian ran in the 4.5s, and that's why he fell to the second round. So he's going to Denver. Now you have Patrick Surtain, you have Riley Moss, you have Jaquan McMillan playing in the slot, and there's going to be an opportunity for certainly Shedeur to get on the field in that secondary. I thought that maybe running back might be a landing spot here for the Denver Broncos. It's wild to say that this team, after drafting Bo Nix last year and getting Sean Payton and all the things George Payton has done as GM, this team has very few needs. So this isn't a luxury pick, but this is a guy that's going to have an opportunity to play right away, even though it wasn't necessarily the top of the needs board when you looked at Denver heading into this draft.
Wide receiver duos, so 2024. We're talking secondary duos in 2025 with some premium picks going to places that already have talents in those types of rooms. We're going to bring this to summation on the AFC side, a winner and a loser. Looking at an AFC team that's walking away from this thing feeling like they hit the nail on the head, Ryan.
Yeah, the Tennessee Titans. Yeah. They didn't mess that up. They took Cam Ward. He's the best quarterback in this draft, and by what ended up being 20-something picks, and I think most people would agree that was the range in which he was probably better than the next quarterback. And I think, and you know Cam well, this young man, in addition to all the physical tools, has an edge. And there's something to be said for the neck-up approach to playing the quarterback position in the NFL, because all the guys can make the throws. All the guys are 4'6", 4'7" guys. It's the matter of getting punched in the mouth and being able to get back up and make plays. And Cam has proven that at every level, and every year he has gotten better as a quarterback.
Your biggest winner?
For me, I got to go with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, to make that trade and you still get the 5th overall pick, right, and you get a player that you probably coveted and had pretty high on your board, but then you walk away with still 4 picks in the top 100 left. And that has to be a win. That has to be a win. Now you're sitting there in the second round, you have pick 33 and pick 36. That's an absolute win to me for Andrew Berry. Now, you still have to pick the right players, but you have the right picks to really fill out your roster.
How quickly can you exact change is only fueled by the draft picks that you have. You now have more, and you can change a little faster there in Cleveland. For every winner, there is, in fact, a loser. And our loser is staring us in the face because he was staring them in the face. And I know you both share the same loser because I got the answers to the test here. Why the Pittsburgh Steelers, Ryan?
Well, they have a huge need at quarterback. Shedeur felt like a natural fit. I had heard that the organization liked Shedeur enough to take him at the bottom of the first round. And even if you pass on Shedeur, I understand Kenneth Grant, the tackle out of Michigan, being in need and taking him, should he have been available, he was long gone. I had heard that Derek Harmon, the player they took, had some injury concerns for some other teams. So I have a lot of questions about how they got to this point. Again, I understand defensive tackle, just the player I do wonder about long-term health-wise, and also the looming question of who's going to play quarterback in 2025.
Maybe the most important question that we ask year by year of each of these teams in football. You had an answer. It's right there for you. What do you think may have been the impetus or the driving force in them not selecting Shedeur Sanders? They only know, but how do you read that move?
To me, it says that they have something, probably nod, wink, wink, set up with Aaron Rodgers whenever he's ready. And they truly feel like that's going to happen. For me, I understand why you would take a defensive tackle to eventually replace Cam Hayward, because he's not going to play forever, and a young guy that he could pass the torch to. I totally understand that. But if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, the model of consistency and stability, you take a guy who's injured, who has an injury history, and depending on who you talk to, you don't know if this guy's going to make it to his second contract with the club, which does not feel like a Pittsburgh Steeler thing to me. And then you add in, you pass on the quarterback, whether it was Shedeur, whether it was Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, whomever. And now you're going to still be faced with this question in the 2026 draft as to who the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback is going to be for the future.
And the other thing, the point that Rand made earlier, is that unlike the Browns, because this was my question, they don't have the draft capital going into next year to move up because they always end up picking picks 22, 30. So even if they were the Browns and had the extra first-round pick, that would allow them the opportunity to move up. But if they're picking in the middle to the bottom of the first round, they're not going to be able to target whoever the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks may be.
To quote our colleague, the 2-time Super Bowl champ in black and yellow, Bryant McFadden, What are we doing? That was the question posed. The answer, it still lingers. Gentlemen, great work as always. We got more coming here on CBS Sports HQ with night one of the draft behind us. Straight ahead, we turn our attention to the NFC teams having selected, but who made out the biggest winner? Find out next. Back in studio, Ryan Wilson, Rand Carthon, Joe Musso. The Hallis Trophy has a safe home there in Philadelphia, but got plenty of teams trying to knock them off that mantle at the top of the NFC. Going to take a look at our biggest winners and losers here in the NFC, starting with an offensive playmaker. Ryan, your favorite offensive playmaker heading to an NFC team?
My wide receiver one, excuse me. Someone's on this desk is wide receiver 5, incredibly disrespectful, but Shedeur McMillan, as we look for the culprit here, headed to the Carolina Panthers to give Bryce Young some help, and they do need help at wide receiver. We talked perhaps Jalen Walker being an obvious choice here, the linebacker / edge rusher out of Georgia, the 8th overall pick, but they took Tet because while they have Adam Thielen and they have Xavier Legette and they have Jalen Coker, who was a fun story last year as an undrafted free agent, Tet McMillan gives them an immediate jump ball, high point, contested catch machine down the field. Does he regularly separate? No, but that's not his game. And Bryce Young is one of the best anticipation throwers among the young quarterbacks. Yeah. Played really well down the stretch, and I think they are turning the corner with Dave Canales, and I love the fit there. They need help on defense, sure, but I think they couldn't pass up Tet McMillan there at number 8.
You got Legette going 6'3". You got Tet now going 6'4", butting his head on 6'5". There's some big targets there for Bryce Young to distribute that ball to. You're going wide receiver as well, but elsewhere.
Going wide receiver, going Matthew Golden to Green Bay. This just screams Matt LaFleur to me, right? And I think when Golden's name was called and they showed the draft room, I saw a little extra smile on LaFleur's face. This guy's the quintessential X wide receiver in that offensive system. And if you know that offensive system, they love to have the guy that's going to stretch the field vertically, where they can take shots for explosive, but also create some of that intermediate game that they like to throw and play in between those numbers. That was the role that that Christian Watson was supposed to fill, but he's suffered through injuries, and this is a plug-and-play X-receiver in that offense that's going to create those explosives for him.
And you think of some of the burners that have come out of this program, and it almost felt like a sigh of relief 30 years in the making for Packers fans who finally select a wide receiver in the 1st overall pick, albeit in front of that crowd there in Ashwaubenon. So there was some praise for this young man who, you made a great point, doesn't get to jump on the PJ anywhere. He's just staying right there in Green Bay. Robbed him of a private jet.
So unfortunate. He's literally going to walk 1 block from the stadium.
Facilities that way.
Facility, and probably to the Hilton Garden Inn that's up the street where he's going to stay.
Well, we're going to keep our eyes here on a couple Longhorns, because when we go to the offensive line, that's once again where your eyes go there, number 9, Kelvin Banks.
I've always loved Kelvin Banks, and I love the way he plays his game, and he's a guy that I've consistently said he is the model of consistency. And going there, this is a New Orleans pick. They draft a year ahead of a need consistently, and Ryan Ramczyk retired this week. They also announced this week that they're not picking up the 5th-year option of Trevor Penning. And this feels to me kind of like when they took Andres Pete 13th overall in 2015, where you have this lineman that there's no rush to put him out there on the field, but he could probably play guard for you this year as one of your best 5, which is what they did with Andres Pete. Now, guard ended up being the home for Andres Pete, but there were moments where he played some left and right tackle for him. But I do think that Kelvin Banks will eventually be their starting tackle.
He is a top 10 pick forever, going there at number 9 to the New Orleans Saints. Your favorite offensive line?
3 picks later, pick 12, the Dallas Cowboys. Do they need running back help? Sure. They instead decide to bolster the offensive line with Tyler Booker out of Alabama, one of my favorite offensive linemen in this draft class. I thought he had a chance to be a top 15 pick, even though he's a guard only, quotation marks. And for all the knocks we like to take against the Dallas Cowboys, they have made the offensive line a focus. They took Tyler Guyton in the 1st round. They took Tyler Smith in the 1st round several years ago. They have Cooper Beebe playing center now, who they drafted last year. And now you have Tyler Booker. So you're giving the offensive line and that offense with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb all the help they need up front. They signed Javonte Williams at running back. They can still circle back, get a running back in day 2 or day 3 if they want to. Incredibly deep running back class. But I think this is the perfect landing spot for Tyler Booker, and right around the range I thought he would come off. I know he didn't run the fast 40 time at the combine. I do not care, because I don't think they have plans to give him the ball, throw him the ball. Just they're going to ask him to block, and that's what he does extremely well.
I don't know if you guys noticed on the graphic, their last 3 first-round pick offensive linemen have all been named Tyler.
There's something there. We found something, the through line to it all. And it is big shoes to fill there on that offensive line with the retirement of Zach Martin. So they're going to be looking to plug some of those holes up front. A measured approach here by Jerry and the Dallas Cowboys going offensive line there. Let's go to defense. Any level, your favorite player? Obviously, we're going to be looking early in this draft.
Abdul Carter, 3rd overall to the New York Giants. It just feels like a layup. If not for Travis Hunter being in this draft class, Abdul Carter would have been the #1 player on my big board. He ended up being number 2. And he is just learning the position, Rand. He was playing off-ball linebacker until last year, wore the number 11, so reminded a lot of people of Micah Parsons. He's not quite there yet. He's still incredibly raw, but he doesn't have to be the guy in New York because they have Brian Burns, they have Kayvon Thibodeau, they have Dexter Lawrence. I think it's a best-case scenario for a young defensive edge rusher. Learning that position, coming into that system, I think he's going to eat early and often.
And for me, you got to go with the Atlanta Falcons and what they were able to do with getting Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. Now, was the compensation too much for the future? Yeah, probably. I don't know that I would have given up a future.
We'll see what that first is next year. That's going to determine whether or not this deal was done properly.
Correct. But if you're a Raheem Morris defense, you now have your edge guys coming off the edge that are going to give you that pressure and create those sacks that Atlanta's been missing. And this year they went out in free agency and you signed Leonard Floyd, and then you have Arnold Ebiketie, who is going into the final year of his rookie deal, and now you add 2 dynamic guys that can come off the edge. And then with Jalen Walker, you can kind of play him in multiple spots and move him around and create mismatches for him, lining him up over guards, or even playing him off the ball at off-the-ball linebacker. So love what the Falcons did there, getting these 2 dynamic young playmakers.
Yeah, doing 2 for 1 there, making up for lost time as they've continually gone offensive premium player position in the first round, whether it be Penix or London or Bijan or Pitts. This is a commitment back to the trenches there for Atlanta. Talking winners and losers, a holistic approach here in the NFC. Your biggest winner?
Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Okay.
So Emeka Egbuka, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about him as a potential first-round pick in the millions of mock drafts we did in the last 2 weeks.
Loved him.
You loved him, and you were right. Former wide receiver. Joe knows wide receivers. Ted Rowe McMillan aside. But in terms of Emeka Egbuka, in terms of the Ohio State lineage of wide receivers, Emeka Egbuka does not get the credit he deserves, I feel like. It's easy to talk about the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s and the Garrett Wilsons, the Chris Olaves, the Jackson Smith and Jigbas. Emeka Egbuka is in that conversation, and he is the most professional receiver, not only in this draft class, but perhaps in the last few draft classes, because he can play slot, play outside, fantastic route runner, and I think Baker Mayfield's going to love him.
And it's to the point of you saying the multiple positions that he can play. This is a Chris Godwin replacement. And Chris Godwin, he fractured or dislocated his ankle in week 7, I believe. And so they can now afford to bring him along slow because you have a player that can play that type of role in that offense. And if you talk to some people in Tampa, they will tell you that Chris Godwin is probably the most valuable receiver that they have because he can do a multitude of things, and he's a presence for them in the run game and sticking his face in there, blocking linebackers, being able to insert.
So maybe a future heir to that throne there. Mike Evans, each day a day older, but still giving you 1K plus. But that is quite a 3-headed monster at full health, a wide receiving core for Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. A big winner in the eyes of both of our experts. A big loser, you guys are on the same page here, but it does come a conditional loss, let's say. Your biggest loser, Rand? Yeah,
you put the Saints because we've heard that the Saints have been in love with Jackson Dart. So the thing is if you knew, if this is true, then you allowed the Giants to jump you. When you had the ammunition to go from 40 to wherever, 25, 26, wherever to take him. And so you miss out on your quarterback. However, you can make a case for now you sit there at 40, you still have a Shedeur available to you at 40. What do you do? And if they can walk away from at 40 with a quarterback, most notably Shedeur, then we can flip that and call them a winner.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And the thing about Shedeur that'll be interesting, it felt like, to Rand's point, that the Saints were higher on Jackson Dart than Shedeur. But you love the idea of Shedeur having to play indoors, so you can't make the excuse about the arm strength outdoors in the AFC North, for example, in the wintertime in December. And also, Kellen Moore has a good track record with quarterbacks young and old, and you like that fit, given that they've now drafted Banks at tackle, and they have the playmakers, the wide receivers, starting with Chris Olave.
Ryan, Rand, fantastic stuff. We appreciate the insight, but there's always more work to be done, and you're only as good as your next rep. We take a look ahead at day 2 of the NFL draft with some big names still out there as Shedeur Sanders slides to day 2. Possible landing spots. We'll break it down next. You want the good news or you want the bad news? The bad news is you still haven't been drafted. The good news, 5 quarterbacks in NFL history drafted in the second round have gone on to win NFL MVP or the Super Bowl, including your most recent in Jalen Hurts. Maybe the carrot currently dangling out in front of Shedeur Sanders. Back in studio with...
We all didn't expect this, of course, but I feel like with God, anything possible, everything possible. I don't feel like this happened, for no reason. All this is of course, fuel to the fire. And under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't have happened. But we understand we're on the bigger and better things. Tomorrow's the day. We're going to be happy regardless. Legendary.
All right, some words there from Shedeur Sanders after his disappointment here on day 1 of the NFL draft. Ryan Wilson, Rand Carthon here to react and push it forward, because the reality is exactly what he just said. He will have a team, and he now has a bigger chip on his shoulder to go do something at the next level. Rand, when you look at the possible landing spots for Shedeur now, and we look at the early stages of that second round, what does it look like?
I think you still have QB-needy teams that entered day 1 needing quarterbacks that didn't make those picks, and you start with the Cleveland Browns, and we've talked about them sitting at 33 and 36. Could they do it? Possibly. And then you have the Raiders, because you traded for a veteran in Geno Smith, and why not have, if you have the opportunity to take a Shedeur Sanders and have him there to learn under Geno and bring him along, that's a good landing spot for him. And then the Saints at 40, we talked about them being linked to Jackson Dart and allegedly going to want to move up to take a guy, and now Shedeur may possibly be staring you in the face at 40. And I add, at some point or along this entire process, he's met with all 3 of those teams. And so there is some familiarity there. You're not just taking a shot on the guy just because he's there.
Ryan, when you look at Shedeur and all that he can be at the next level, the skill set that he does bring, and the words that he offers there in his moment of disappointment, how do you really sum up this first day of the draft for Shedeur?
You know, it's funny because you mentioned Jalen Hurts, and I think that's instructive on some level, because I remember the Senior Bowl that year ran where it was Jordan Love there, Justin Herbert there, and oh, by the way, Jalen Hurts was the afterthought, fair or unfair. And I think Jalen Hurts quietly went about his business, did what he could in terms of what he could control, got drafted in the second round, as you noted, Joe, and then the rest is history, so to speak. He's certainly been more effective over the course of his career than either the first-round picks or the Senior Bowl with him that year, and I think that's the way that Shedeur and his camp have to approach this. You can't control anything other than once your name is finally called, and what are you going to do from that point on? And there may be conversations down the road about maybe Shedeur rub some of these teams the wrong way, and he can use that as a learning experience going forward as well. Because, again, he's a young man. He's 22, 23 years old. He has a long future ahead of him. But it's important to learn from your mistakes in much the same way Jalen Hurts used that as motivation, not being a first-round pick, even though, as it turns out, he should have been.
You want the good news or you want the bad news? The bad news is you still haven't been drafted. The good news, 5 quarterbacks in NFL history drafted in the second round have gone on to win NFL MVP or the Super Bowl, including your most recent in Jalen Hurts. Maybe the carrot currently dangling out in front of Shedeur Sanders.
We all didn't expect this, of course, but I feel like with God, anything possible, everything possible. I don't feel like this happened, for no reason. All this is of course, fuel to the fire. And under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't have happened. But we understand we're on the bigger and better things. Tomorrow's the day. We're going to be happy regardless. Legendary.
All right, some words there from Shedeur Sanders after his disappointment here on day 1 of the NFL draft. Ryan Wilson, Rand Carthon here to react and push it forward, because the reality is exactly what he just said. He will have a team, and he now has a bigger chip on his shoulder to go do something at the next level. Rand, when you look at the possible landing spots for Shedeur now, and we look at the early stages of that second round, what does it look like?
I think you still have QB-needy teams that entered day 1 needing quarterbacks that didn't make those picks, and you start with the Cleveland Browns, and we've talked about them sitting at 33 and 36. Could they do it? Possibly. And then you have the Raiders, because you traded for a veteran in Geno Smith, and why not have, if you have the opportunity to take a Shedeur Sanders and have him there to learn under Geno and bring him along, that's a good landing spot for him. And then the Saints at 40, we talked about them being linked to Jackson Dart and is allegedly going to want to move up to take a guy, and now Shedeur may possibly be staring you in the face at 40. And I add, at some point or along this entire process, he's met with all three of those teams. And so there is some familiarity there. You're not just taking a shot on the guy just because he's there.
Ryan, when you look at Shedeur and all that he can be at the next level, the skill set that he does bring, and the words that he offers there in his moment of disappointment, how do you really sum up this first day of the draft for Shedeur?
You know, it's funny because you mentioned Jalen Hurts, and I think that's instructive on some level, because I remember the Senior Bowl that year ran where it was Jordan Love there, Justin Herbert there, and oh, by the way, Jalen Hurts was the afterthought, fair or unfair. And I think Jalen Hurts quietly went about his business, did what he could in terms of what he could control, got drafted in the second round, as you noted, Joe, and then the rest is history, so to speak. He's certainly been more effective over the course of his career than either the first-round picks or the Senior Bowl with him that year, and I think that's the way that Shedeur and his camp have to approach this. You can't control anything other than once your name is finally called, and what are you going to do from that point on? And there may be conversations down the road about maybe Shedeur rub some of these teams the wrong way, and he can use that as a learning experience going forward as well. Because, again, he's a young man. He's 22, 23 years old. He has a long future ahead of him, but it's important to learn from your mistakes in much the same way Jalen Hurts used that as motivation, not being a first-round pick, even though, as it turns out, he should have been.
We have learned from the past, certainly over these last decades, and seen how you build football teams, and it's a little bit on day one. You want those star performers, but the depth, the real meat of rosters being built over these next couple of days. And we're looking at an interesting start to this second round with, as you mentioned, Cleveland having 2 picks early on. The Chicago Bears also 2 early picks. The phones might be ringing here in the not too distant future once that clock is active once again. How do you see the top of that second playing out for the Browns specifically?
Well, the Browns can go a lot of areas, because if you're looking at their wide receiver core, they still do not have a complement for Jerry Jeudy, right? And so we've talked about quarterback being a spot. Now you look at receiver, because for a long time they were expected to take Travis Hunter at 2, who was going to fill that role. Right. And then you look in the backfield now, because Nick Chubb is still unsigned. And so will they look at a running back at one of those 2 spots? So I expect them to kind of continue to bolster the offensive side with picks 33 and 36.
I'll give you 2 names that could be potential targets there. Luther Burden III out of Missouri, big slot receiver, 6 feet, 200 pounds, ran sub 4.5. Really good in 2023. Quarterback situation was suspect because of injuries last year. And then Trey Henderson, who I thought had a chance to sneak into the back of the first round, the Ohio State running back, who can certainly run. We know what he can do there, but he will block, and he's an asset in the pass game. And those 2 guys immediately make that offense a lot better, even though, much like the Steelers, there are some questions at the quarterback position for Cleveland.
Yeah, holes to fill in. We'll see if they do select at both of those spots or continue to maximize as they did here on day 1 of the NFL draft. You said you'll give me 2 names. I need 2 more from you. But let's start on the offensive side of the football. A name or 2 that really interests you heading into day 2, value presented that maybe even could have been a day 1 name.
Yeah, so offensive side, let's see here. Shedeur is obviously still out there. We've talked about him. Luther Burden is next on my big board. And then I'll mention offensive lineman, Arante Ursary. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about him, the Minnesota left tackle. I wouldn't call him developmental, but he certainly needs some room to grow. Maybe not a day 1 starter. That could also be an option there as we scroll down my little big board here. The other name I'll mention, tight end Gunnar Helm. I like him a lot out of Texas. Ran in the 4.8s at the combine, but here's how tough he is. He ran on a bum ankle. I would encourage him as his agent not to run and then run the 4.6 at his pro day. He did it anyway. He plays much faster than that. He could be a potential target at some point on day 2.
A lot was made about this tight end class and the talent up top there. We did see a couple go in the first round of the NFL draft, but as narrative gets drawn and as these names get filled into the slots, you get stretched out. You do find guys like Helm, who in a different Plinko, if the chip falls in a different place, could have also heard his name earlier on. We're seeing all this value in the second round and where it's going to end up. A couple offensive names from you, Ram.
For me, and Ryan mentioned Luther Burden, being one, and just a guy that he's a big slot now, but I think in time and in the right system, he's going to learn to play outside and be able to be moved around. And then I love the Gunnar Helm pick as well. But then you're looking at a guy like Isaiah Bond, who's here, had an incident come up here late but you're talking about still an explosive wide receiver who can stretch the field, who's a playmaker with the ball in his hands. And so those are two guys, and especially with this receiver depth being where it is, and now you're going to start seeing these guys come off the board in day 2.
Another individual that prior to this season, maybe we thought that he'd be serving the role that his counterpart at Texas and Golden did here on day 1. So we'll see what happens for those offensive names. Defensive depth, always a need in this physical league. When you look to some of those day 2 names, who excites you, maybe opportunity early on in that second round?
The first guy that jumps off to me is Mike Green, because Mike Green was mocked to go as high as 15 at one point, possibly to the Atlanta Falcons, and there was a lot of interest from there. But in my mind, I think Mike Green is probably the most natural pass rusher, just in terms of being coordinated and understanding how to set up the moves. And then you go with a guy like Will Johnson, you know, a big corner who was a projected first-round pick as well, who fits different schemes. Now, he had the injury that caused him to miss some time, and like like Ryan said,
we'll draft him too.
he didn't run. And the fact that he didn't run and there were questions about the speed is giving some teams some pause. Because I think if he ran, and if he would have run in the 4.5 range, we would have saw his name called today.
No, exactly. That's right. And there was some concern whether he could do that. We'll never know. And now he'll be a day 2 pick. Nick Emanwori, the safety out of South Carolina, tested through the roof, had great tape. I think he was just a victim of getting pushed down because teams were focusing on other needs. He's a first-round talent in my mind. You see here, he's the best available safety. Kevin Winston Jr. was hurt for much of the season out of Penn State. Then he showed up after a knee injury, ran a 4.5 about a month ago. He mentioned Will Johnson did. You also have Subone Revel. You have Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, who had the injury history. Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Jackson Dart described him as the best cornerback he faced in the SEC, his teammate for the Rebs. So there's going to be a run, it feels like, on cornerbacks, because after the next 5 or 6 cornerbacks, there may be a gap before we see the next group off the board, probably late day 2, early day 3.
I want to talk about great tape. Ryan Wilson, Rand Carthon, doing it here all night long on CBS Sports HQ. Gentlemen, we thank you. We do know the work is not done yet for these fellas. Join them for in-depth conversations all weekend long, including a breakdown of the first round on With the First Pick.